visual.
We'll see for sure.
Is everyone feeling ready?
And he's on the inside track on actually being an instructor, so the instructor school for 6 months, then come back and teach other pilots for 4 years, which I'm hoping for.
On what plane?
Good evening, everybody. I will now call to order the study session meeting of April 17th, 2023. Members of the public are invited to attend in-person city council meetings in council chambers on the lower level of City Hall. Public access to tonight's meeting is also available on the local government access channel 8 for Comcast subscribers, on the city's YouTube channel online, and by telephone using the call-in numbers posted on the meeting agenda. Will the city clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Lighty is absent. Mayor Pro Tem Luke Manhero-Massa.
Here?
Councilmember Long.
Here.
Councilmember Jaramillo.
Here.
Councilmember Kondo.
Here.
Councilmember Burns.
Here.
Councilmember Goff.
Here.
Councilmember Brown.
Here.
Councilmember Walker.
Here.
Thank you.
Great. Well, let's get started. We have 4 items on our agenda tonight, and the first item is the 2023 Police Department Events Overview, and we have our very own Chief May and Deputy Chief presenting the overview to council. Welcome.
Good evening, Madam Mayor Pro Tem and council members. Hope everybody's having a good day. I put a lot of slides together on this, and we're gonna go through this relatively quickly, if I can figure this out. There we go. Basically, our goal is to provide a council overview for our events for 2023. As you see the events, this is in chronological order for the events. Our Citizens Police Academy generally held in April. Cops versus Kids Kickball will kick off next month. National Night Out, that's a nationwide event. It's always the first first Tuesday in August of every year. Our school principal meeting will be in August, towards mid-August, early August, before the school year starts. Our Shred event is also an August event. We're very, very busy in the month of August. Safe Street Halloween is October, and Christmas Crusade as we wrap up the year in December. When we start with our Citizens Police Academy, this is a long-term event. This has been going on since 1998 in the city. It's really our opportunity to get the community involved in their police department. It brings them into our space. We go over all of the different type of aspects of what is policing in our community. What do police officers do? What is their role? How do we engage the public? As well as the technologies and the different tools that we use to engage the public, throughout the year. To do this academy, you either need to be a resident or an employee within the city of North Glen, and you need to be 18 years of age. We have also in the past done a teen academy, which we continue to want to do. It's a little bit manpower driven, and again, we want to bring that youth in there as well. We were able to do one last year. We have not done one this year. Our Citizens Academy has been postponed for this year. We may be able to get to it later in the season if we have the staffing and available manpower for it, but we have pushed this off due to our staffing shortages right now. The type of things we cover in the academies are community policing strategies, our patrol duties, but what the public really loves to see is the officer safety work, the technology that we use within the department, our cars, all the bells and whistles is what they really love to see. But the crime scene investigation is also a really popular piece. Plus, it gives us a little bit of an opportunity to kind of dispel some of the rumors that they see on the TV show CSI, that we're not going to dig up DNA profiles off of a leaf, off of the dead body that sits in a database somewhere. So we're working to try to kind of level the playing field on what's out there information-wise. How can council get involved in this event? You can attend the Citizens Police Academy. Many council members in the past have been through the Police Academy, the Citizens Academy throughout the years. You can encourage residents to attend and get the idea to understand the police department a little bit better and the policies and the practices and how we do things. You can attend the graduation ceremony. We do that every year in the PD facility. And you can make yourself available to partner with our instructors when we go over the community policing piece of the event. So, any way that you'd like to get involved, we'd welcome your involvement any way you can. There's a lot of different opportunities. And if you come up with an opportunity or a thought that, isn't listed here, we're more than welcome to listen to that and see how we can include you in the event. Cops versus Kickball. This is one of our favorite events. I did this last year. It was one of the first events I engaged in with the community. It was early on, within the first year of my being here. Big event with the kids. Super safe, fun experience, really get the kids in the mix. Everyone from 1st to 8th grade. It's a great opportunity for us and CPAN to get together with the kids. We hold a big competition. There's a lot of pieces to it. They help us design the shirts, the kids do. One of our plans is to use the art departments in the schools to help us design the T-shirts, and then have that as part of the competition between the schools, between the elementary schools, and then have the high schools judge the elementary school, process. Didn't work out last year, but that was the plan, and we're going to continue to work towards that goal. At the end of the day, we play one championship game between the top team that played with against the North Glen Police Department. So it's that opportunity to really, play a game with them. I played in full uniform last year. I was so sore the next day, I couldn't even tell you. But it was a great event, and you could see we get a lot of officers out for this event. They love the engagement, and it's a great non-traditional way for the police to interact with the community, right? It's us as persons, it's us as people, it's not us as the authority or us as the police officer. So it's a really great event for that. How can council get involved? Is you can play in the game. You can come out, play in the game, you can act as a ref, coach the kids' teams. A lot of different ways you can get in there. You can help us design the T-shirts and hats. And again, we turn over the design process, hopefully to the kids at some point, but any help that you want to jump in and give us on this, we'll be glad to take. We always need referees, we always need coaches for the kids' teams. The police officers kind of play dual roles. When I'm not playing on a team, I was coaching a team, or if I was not coaching a team, I'd ref the team. So we just kind of take a lot of different roles when we're playing, so the more the merrier. It's a great way to get involved in the event.
So I can bring my pom-poms?
Sure. You want to cheerlead on the
They're
side?
on my head, but
Bring
I will
'em.
bring them.
Yeah, it's a great event, and we actually have a lot of parents. Because it's an after-school event, the parents have to bring the kids. There's no busing to and from the school. So we have a lot of parents there, a lot of teachers there, and it's a great event, and it's a lot of fun. National Night Out, again, every year, first Tuesday in August. This is a nationwide event. It's done across the country. It's kind of that one big police community relations event where we're really focused on, crime reduction in the communities. For us, it's about our neighborhood watch programs. This year, we are looking to go back to the neighborhoods. We're going back to block parties. We are looking at 15 to 25 block parties is the goal. We're pretty confident we'll be able to pull in 15. We're working towards that 2025 number. It's a great way to bring the community members together, get the people on the block to know their neighbors, bring them out, really bring out awareness to the neighborhood watch program, and then work as a way to kind of shine a light on our community policing programs, build that community relationship with everybody, that partnership with everybody, and then focus on our education practices. How can we educate the public on crime in the community as well as our crime strategies? How can council get involved in this event? You can encourage block parties in your ward. So, identify those locations in your ward that want to host a block party and let us know, and we'll make contact with those individuals and kind of facilitate that process so that we can, get a good number of parties in each ward. You can celebrate National Night Out by traveling with us from block to block. We go block to block when these come out, and we move through the parties throughout the day and through the evening, right? You can inspire the neighborhood watch in your communities, in your wards, and you can help raise awareness for crime prevention through environmental design, which is, just that key principle to the community to say, hey, we're all in the crime fight together. It's not just the police. It's not just the community. It's about how you set up a circumstance through environmental design that makes it more difficult for you and your neighbors and your community to be victims of criminal conduct. So that's the lighting pieces and the trimming trees and bushes and those aspects, fixing broken windows, doors that aren't functioning and are open and easy to see that there's access, those kind of things. Bringing that to the attention of the community through education is critical.
My barbecues were always a hit. Had more officers there, which kept the neighbors away.
So our school principal meeting, this will be our second year with our school principal meeting. Last year was the inaugural year. We host all the North Glen school principals. We celebrate we collaborate with the city schools. We really work with our partners, our Adams 12 five-star school district, and we discuss school safety and the safety measures each year so that there's a refreshing discussion about that. This year was, we had the shooting, the school shooting in Uvalde, right? And our principals last year, at the beginning of the school year, were really genuinely concerned, is what's our response gonna be, right? Because the response there wasn't great. And we were able to talk with them and tell them about our training, tell them about our process, and tell them we're coming. And set the mind at ease that we're not waiting, we're not setting up teams. First officer there is gonna try to attack that individual with the firearm, and we're gonna try to take the threat out. So that discussion's important, and I think it's important to have on an annual basis. And it's a good chance for our school SROs to understand all the principals in the school. The high school really knows the high school SRO, they really know Vantage Point SRO. Maybe they don't know Charlie Feste quite as well, right? He comes over and fills in the blanks, but he's not their primary. And exact opposite for our grade schools and elementary schools. They know Charlie like the back of their hand, but they may not know our two high school SROs. So it's a great time for them to get to meet and familiarize themselves with everybody and everybody to get on the same page. As far as how can you get involved, you stop by and meet all the principals, right? Get to know the SROs. And then I know quite a little bit of this was done this past year, is request a tour of your schools within your wards with your SROs, right? And then you can kind of get an opportunity to meet the SRO, meet the principal, kind of get an idea what the school is and how it's, presented and, just how we manage the security for those schools. So an opportunity there for everyone to kind of get involved in the schools as well. Shred event, this is a hugely popular event. This year it's going to be on August 19th. 8 a.m. to noon. It supports the Denver Crime Stoppers. Over the last 3 years, you can see the amount of paper destroyed, 40 tons in 2020, 24 tons in 2021, and 27 tons last year. We've raised over $31,800. The event is free, but donations are encouraged. The money goes to the Denver Crime Stoppers group and Denver Area Crime Stoppers. And over the years, we've raised quite a bit of money. Really a great event, really helps our elderly understand the financial crimes that come with leaving personal information and throwing it out rather than, shredding it, destroying it, putting it in a garbage can that can be, later manipulated and taken for purposes of crime. So that's really a great way for us to work with our community members to get them involved and educate. It's really an education event, right? So we encourage if you could get involved, you can encourage the Shred event with your residents, of course, especially your senior citizen residents. They tend to be the most easily victimized in this realm, right? Attend the event, bring some documents to Shred, of course. You always want to protect yourselves as well. And then help educate our elderly residents on the dangers of financial crimes and on kind of not just the financial crimes of the identity theft, but also the different scams that are out there. And then our signature event, really, as far as I'm concerned, in my small time here, this event is just such a big deal. It kind of encompasses the department for the whole year. It's been a signature event for over 2 decades. It's really a great environment for the kids. The last 2 years, it's been at a very open space just north of the mall. We've brought in a ton of kids, lots and lots of kids, over 5,000 people each day. Each event. It's our largest event by a long shot. And it's just a great event to bring, kids and families in. In the time I've been here, the event's been wildly successful. I think it's grown each year. 2 years ago, I know that I had people coming from Fort Collins. People were talking about coming from the mountains, Vail, from Breck, into this event. So it's a really well-attended and really well-liked event by the community. And, we have a variety of different things to do. We've got the trunk or treat, the theme tents, the high school giveaway, the students, decorating their tents to whatever theme we set. And then, again, it's about 5,000 or more attendees each year. We have some ancillary events tied to this, the school pumpkin carving contest. So each one of the elementary schools does the carving contest. And then We give prizes to the classroom that, won it. Was pizza party, I think, last year, and some goodie bags type stuff. The creative costumes and the spooky spirit events were, basically through the schools, just, costume day and whatnot. So there are events and ancillary stuff tied to it that the SROs get involved in. And then how can council get involved? I think pretty much everybody's been at this event as far as the council's concerned. Dress up, join in the fun, set up a trunk or treat, set up a scary tent, help pass out candy. You can judge the pumpkin contest, pumpkin carving contest. I really don't think there's a shortage of ways you can get involved in this event. It's fun. Bring your family, bring the kids, bring the grandkids. It's a great day. And then finally, Christmas Crusade. And this is a long-time event. It's been going on for decades, since 1983. It really allows, multiple law enforcement agencies throughout Colorado to really get involved in, bringing the joy of Christmas to children and families that are in need. And for us, it's specifically within North Glen. We really, each individual agency focuses on their community. And there's over 30 law enforcement agencies that are involved in this. There have been over 300,000 children served by this community event over the years. It's a combined outreach of thousands of law enforcement officers, radio listeners, because KYGO is one of the big sponsors of this event, major businesses throughout the community. They are so giving at this time, and they are a big part of the program. And then just, Coloradoans who want to be involved in the event and donate. As far as the event, it really begins in November with identifying the families that are in need within the community. Late November, our elves start shopping, and they start doing the hard work of dragging all those gifts together and kind of putting together the lists that are brought to us by the families in need, and then the wrapping party in early December. Ways that council can get involved. We have that gift wrapping day. It's a huge day. It's not one day either, it's several days. So, you can flexible on the scheduling. Come on over when families meet Santa. That's a great day. Come and distribute presents at the Justice Center. It's a one-day event that is probably 5 to 6 days long when you really think about it, because there's 2 or 3 days of wrapping, there's the shopping day, and then there's the present day giveaway day, and that incorporates the families coming in, getting photos with Santa, collecting gifts, getting hot chocolate, picking additional gifts out of the room. And last year was just a fantastic culmination of the event at the end of the year, and CPAN was hugely involved, and the kids got to come in. They had a fixed set of gifts that they were going to get already bagged and waiting for them, but then they came in and they had the room. They had a bookstore. I think the mayor brought books that they could pick from, and then I know the city manager, we had hot cocoa and cookies, and it was a huge kind of outreach from the community. It was a great event. And we were able to bring it inside. Last year it was outside due to COVID. We brought them back inside this year, and it was really nice to get to see the families up close and personal again. And other than that, I'll take any questions you have.
Fantastic. We do have a couple of hands. Councilmember Kondo.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I just have a statement and then a question. So, first of all, I did participate in the principals meeting, and I think it was a great way to be able to meet all the principals of the schools within my ward as well as Northland High School. It was obviously that's a very early morning on a weekday, but that then resulted in doing some walkthroughs and seeing a practice lockdown drill, which for me was very enlightening. And I think the other thing that I walked away from is just knowing the quality of the officers who are in the SRO cadre. So first of all, I would encourage my fellow council members to, this year around, try and jump in and get to know your principals. Besides the picture of me wrapping the gift, which I actually did very poorly in that in that department, I'm just curious, do we try and focus on buying all the gifts within retailers within the city to kind of make sure that, the monies are being spent to support our local businesses?
So we have a lot of businesses that donate significant amounts of money to these events, and sometimes they're large box stores, the Walmarts and and the other large sporting goods stores that are giving bikes and different sporting goods things. So we can't always necessarily tie it to North Glen, but we're happy to get the North Glen businesses involved. And there are some that are involved. I don't have the list of businesses that we used last year, but it's something I could possibly get if it's something you'd necessarily be interested in viewing. But it really is kind of a very large scale throughout the metro area event. It's not specifically tied to North Glen.
Okay.
30 different agencies throughout the metro area.
Gotcha. Yeah, you're right about that. Some of the bigger box stores
Yeah.
aren't in the city boundaries, so. But again, I really applaud what you all do to engage. And certainly, I see Tim on this slide here. I know I strong-armed him to come before he joined the days. And Tim, thank you for doing this.
Most welcome.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Goff.
Thank you. My question is, because I've participated in the Christmas one a lot, and I like wrapping presents, so. But we have been, like bins or something at the rec center, and people can put toys in there. Do those toys go towards this Christmas crusade, or do they go do something else?
So one thing Deputy Chief was talking about when the kids come in, right? When they come in and they, we had the bookstore set up, and then we do Santa's workshop. So that was put together, so a lot of those presents that come in those bins go in Santa's workshop. And when people are wrapping, because we'll have families, so the priority when we get the gifts in, because they can be sponsored, and individual kids in the family could be sponsored by different people out there on the radio station. So some kids might get awesome stuff. So that toy shop helps us, kind of balance out the gifts for the other kids in those families. So we use those first. However, we don't have much storage. So when the kids come in, it's kind of cool. So Santa shows up there, at Christmas Crusade every year. And the kids will go into the toy store, see Santa, get pictures taken. And then they get to pick out another gift, that's not wrapped. And then go pick up the gifts that are wrapped. So we are one of the only ones that actually wrap all our presents. So that's why, it's so important, because we think it's important. So when you guys come help us wrap those gifts, all those kids are getting wrapped presents under the Christmas tree. And that's a big deal.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Let's see, Councilmember Brown.
I'm actually going to do my favorite shout out to the Citizens Police Academy because I've been through it. It was so much fun. You know that we live and breathe by CPAN in our house. And I think it's important for anybody that's listening to know that once you go through the Citizens Police Academy, you have an opportunity to join CPAN, which we volunteer a lot. I get dragged around a lot because I'm not really a member. But I think it's important for them to know that we have more things to do besides just going through the class, which is a blast. When I went through it many moons ago, you let us shoot real guns. Rick Kellogg was our community engagement officer at that time. And yeah, it was fun. It was a lot of fun. So I definitely encourage residents to take the time to do that. I noticed that North Metro Fire is doing a Citizens Academy in April. So I think that would be exciting. I want to go just watch it because, I can't save anybody's life. But I'd like to go watch it. And then they're going to do a Teen Academy, I think in August, possibly. So I'd really like to see our Teen Academy get up and going again. Thank you for everything you do.
Councilmember Goff, do you have another question?
Oh,
Your
no.
hand is up.
Nope,
Okay.
nope, didn't put it down.
I do have a couple of questions. To piggyback off of that, so do we have an idea of when we could possibly do another Teen Academy or restart the Citizens Academy?
So we're hoping that our staffing is kind of back to a decent level by the end of the summer. So as we progress into the fall, we'll look at whether or not we can really put together a Citizens Academy or a Teen Academy. Last year, the Teen Academy was earlier, it was March, if I remember correctly.
No, we did we did a Teen Academy in the summer when the SROs were off, so that's when we held it. It was a shorter version. However, coming off that COVID, trying to get it back to that, because that's a great recruiting tool. I think over the years since we So in 99, that's when we started our first teen police academy, and from that time, we probably had 14 people that went through that and became police officers. So that's something that we want to build in. And then, you know, the opportunity to the north, on the school to the north, with a lot of the kids looking at law enforcement and everything else, we can recruit there. There's some ideas that we have that we'll bring forward to see if, you know, we can maybe start that up and really get back in there to build those, and that's what it was for, right? After Columbine, we wanted to make sure that we're building those relationships with those kids, so we would never have an incident where people would feel, you know, have trust with the law enforcement, you know, and report if they felt that someone had a gun. And we recovered many guns, you know, from this, you know, North Glen High School because of some of the relationships that the SROs had in those schools. So, and then teaching, you just build stronger relationships with those, the students.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah. To that point, when Councilmember Kondo and I did the tour of Washington Square, there were a lot of young kids in the law enforcement class, so I think that's a really great opportunity, if that existed, for some of those teens to also do that as well. Very surprising, the amount of kids that were in that class. One other question I had is, when are we going to see police department versus firefighters dodgeball? There's cops versus kickball, I'm just
We
saying.
don't have that plan, but the state of the city, on July 20th, I did throw the gauntlet down to North Metro Fire, and they accepted. So we are doing a barbecue, coming up with the name yet, so you know what we're gonna call it, but I think that's gonna be, everybody benefits, because just great barbecue, right? So, but it's always a fun competition. It's really difficult for police to actually go up against professional cooks and part-time firefighters, so that's always a difficult thing. And I'm looking forward to their academies of where they teach how to wash fire trucks and how they do all that stuff. So I'm really throwing it out at them right now. So the competition for that is going to be a lot of fun. So make sure you guys vote PD. You know, vote for blue. So.
Absolutely.
So Chief, you want me to pass that on tomorrow night at the board meeting?
Exactly. I told Dave Ramos the same thing. I'm like, here, you know,
Yeah.
and they beat me all the time, but I still try to, you know, show up. So.
Okay.
That's great. Does anyone have any questions, any other questions for Chief or Deputy Chief?
I have a quick question.
Hey, Councilmember.
So going back to Shred Day, I was very interested in, so it's shredding documents, but there's also a piece on digital scamming and stuff as well that you could potentially learn about during that day. Is that what I was hearing?
So it's not a huge, the education is much more towards the financial crime stuff.
Okay.
We're not doing digital destruction.
Yeah, we're not.
We're not doing.
We
digital
used to.
destruction.
We don't do. It's too expensive. You know,
Yeah.
to recycle.
So like the CDs, DVDs, that type of stuff, where hard drives, we're not doing that type of destruction. That's not funded through this program.
Okay.
But the education piece of financial crimes and of specifically identity theft, those are the education pieces that we put out, but it is not designed for digital destruction.
Yeah, 'cause tax season is a big time for that kind of stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, great question, Councilmember Burns. Councilmember Brown, do you still have a question, or is your hand still up?
I'm used to the mayor putting it down. I'm sorry. Or
I
I'm
was trying to figure it out.
spoiled.
I don't quite know that. I do have one other question, just with neighborhood nights being back, National Night Out, I should say, being back in the neighborhoods. How do folks go about, getting involved in that? How soon can they start to reserve whatever they need to for the block parties, et cetera?
Our community relations officers are already trying to make those contacts right now, so it's not too early. They can do that now. They can reach into our community relations office, or you can get the information to us and we'll get it to the officers so that we can have an outreach back to them.
But you know, that's contacting our current, block captains. So if there's people out there that want to join or do this National Night Out, please just give us a call and we'll get them on the list and set them up to make sure they have everything they need for their party. So.
Excellent, thank you. I do not see any more hands except Councilmember Brown's hand that she cannot get
Which I
down.
really, no, I just put it up
Oh, you
again.
did?
It was
Okay.
down.
Oh, this is for real this time. Go ahead,
No,
Councilmember
Heather,
Brown.
this question is for you. Can we get Diana to start putting it, in the connection? Or is it, already?
That's already in motion.
Okay.
So you should see these events on the event lineup that came out in the activity guide just recently. You can tear off that page and then event is working hand in hand with the police to make sure that they're getting the word out about the events. I think they've set up Facebook pages already or in the process of doing that on the social media front. So that's underway.
And it doesn't have to be a block captain, it can be anybody in the neighborhood? Because a lot of the older areas that used to have block captains and all that stuff don't have them anymore, but I'd like to see some of them get back into the habit.
This is a great way to kickstart a neighborhood watch group, right? You know, send flyers out to all your neighbors. We'll put together a flyer where they can just say, they're the host, this is where they're gonna do it, and then they can, you know, put it on the doors in their neighborhood. So
Perfect.
make it easy for them.
A great problem is if we have too many block parties to get to. That'd be a
That
great
would
problem
be
to have.
great. Thank you. And actually, Councilmember Long and I do have that on our Ward 4 meeting agenda next week to discuss Neighborhood Watch, so great time to tie that in. I don't see any further questions, so thank you so much.
Thank you.
Chief, Deputy Chief, have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, the next item on our agenda is electric scooters and e-bicycle follow-up, and we have Amanda Peterson, Director of Parks, Recreation, and Culture, to introduce the item. Welcome, Amanda.
Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem and Council. Some of these slides may look a little familiar because it's a follow-up to a session we had this past November. So our purpose tonight is to provide you with follow-up information from that previous meeting and to bring forward some feedback we received during public outreach. A little bit of background, that previous study session was in November of 2022. And at that study session, we received consensus from you to move forward with the expanded definition of OPDMDs. So we won't talk much about OPDMDs tonight. I'll have a little refresher slide just with some images, but already received that consensus. But really to review the public engagement that we received. So as a bit of a refresher, some imagery of what each of these devices that we're talking about are. First one is electric assisted bicycles. These are currently allowed on public roadways by current ordinances. They're not specifically allowed or disallowed on our trails. We're silent on them. And they can be used by anyone. There are multiple classes of these bikes. We also don't define any differentiation between a class 1, 2, and 3. That's certainly something we can go further into if there's a determination that we should. The second device is an electric scooter. This is kind of what started some of this conversation. They are currently allowed on public roadways. They are not allowed on sidewalks, on trails, or in parks unless it's posted. We do not have it posted anywhere currently that allows for them in those locations. We specifically disallow them to be operated by minors. And we're, at this point in time, talking about privately owned scooters, not the shared scooters or a dockless scooter, which had raised some concerns during public engagement. Part of the reason for the specific differentiation here on scooters is that state statute has defined an electric scooter very specifically as a device that's 100 pounds or less, that has handlebars, and typically reaches a maximum speed of 20 miles per hour. So that really took it out of that toy vehicle category and into the same category as our scooters and electric bicycles. And then this last one just shows our OPDMDs or other power-driven mobility devices. Generally, these are mobility aids for those who have some sort of mobility impairment. And as I mentioned earlier, we had consensus to broaden that definition. And so the city attorney has drafted language that we're ready to move forward with that can either be done independently or with any other changes that we discuss tonight. So survey results, we reached out to the community via the Northglenn Connection and social media and asked some questions in December of 2022 and January of 2023. We received 71 responses from those. We wanted to be pretty straightforward in our questions, so we asked 4. One was and they were what we felt like council was asking the most of that we didn't have great answers to at the last meeting. So one was, should children under the age of 18 be allowed to ride a scooter? 2 was, where should electric scooters and bicycles be allowed in the city? 3 was what concerns do you have about scooters? 4 was what concerns do you have about electric bicycles? So we'll take each of these kind of one question at a time as we go through.
Sorry, Amanda, to stop you here. I do
Yes.
have a hand. Councilmember Condo?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Curious, I think we also discussed last fall where the one wheel, which category does that fall into?
I believe those
Is that
still fall
OPMD?
under as toys,
The one wheel is.
like a hoverboard
Licensed vehicle.
or
No, but
It's called
Unicycle,
one wheel
electric
where
unicycle.
Unicycle, I
Yeah.
believe what they're called.
never seen one.
this thing can go like 25 miles. I mean, you can.
I think that would fall under the category of electric bicycle, and I apologize, I didn't catch that one, but we can clarify that.
Yeah, I'm just trying to, in my head, figure out which,
I was going to ask the same question.
sorry.
I have not seen and I'd have to look, but I haven't seen a definition of a e-bicycle that specifies it has 2 wheels.
Yeah,
Have you? Okay, so I'm guessing it would fall in that category, but we could confirm that for you.
okay, thank you.
I am writing that down though, so that I don't leave it out. All right, so that first question, now that I backed up on there. Should children under the age of 18 be permitted to ride an electric scooter? This was probably the question with the most variability in response, but still had 53, vast majority were saying yes, that they should be allowed. Most of those in favor had comments like fewer regulations are better, or wanted the opportunity for kids to be able to ride to school or to work. Those that were opposed had comments like kids would go too fast. I'd say those same comments probably also appeared on their general concerns, just that people will go too fast. Some assumptions around the dangers of electric scooters. And then there were definitely some comments about not having a desire to have dockless or shared use scooters as a part of that. Second question was, where should they be allowed? And really the answer we got was, people tended to pick 2 or 3 of those items. So there's not a straight 71 people said. There's a lot of overlap in those. There were only 4, however, that said, nope, they shouldn't be allowed anywhere in North Glen. Everyone else was generally picking 2 or more categories and saying yes to roadways and bikes, yes to trails, yes to parks, and yes, on a lesser scale, to residential sidewalks. So these are start to repeat a little bit because we saw similar feedback as we went through the questions. What concerns do you have about electric scooters? People will go too fast or won't follow other rules, that there's a danger to them, and that, again, that assumption that the question might be related to allowing for shared use scooters like Lime. There was a clear opposition to those shared use scooters. We weren't asking that question, but people definitely shared that input. And then what concerns do you have about electric bikes? This in general was just around speed. And some made comments that those speed concerns on e-bikes was just as concerning on a traditional bicycle as well. Most of those e-bikes, the class 1 e-bike will allow for a pedal assist, or the motor operates, up to, when you reach 20 miles an hour, the pedal assist turns off and is only the human power. A class 2, they still have they'll reach that 20 miles per hour, but the pedal assist and the motor will continue. And then the class 3, I believe that goes up to 30 or 35 miles per hour. So that's kind of that differentiation between the class 1, 2, and 3 on the e-bikes. Scooters have some similarities. They don't appear to be classed quite as, in quite as defined a manner. So what are your options? And I'm going to apologize. I noticed there's an extra bullet on this slide, so I'm sorry if it makes it confusing. Please ignore the second bullet under option 2. Option 2 and option 3 should be standalone. You can consider those together or separately. You don't have to do both in either case. So option 1 would be no significant changes, that e-bikes, scooters would be allowed primarily on roadways only, and for those who are 18 and older only. The changes associated with this, we would update the language in the ordinance to address the OPDMD definitions, as we talked about previously, and then make sure that our language aligned with state statute but no other changes could be made. The second option would be to allow e-bikes and electric scooters on sidewalks, trails, and/or in parks. You can pick any of those. It doesn't have to be all or nothing, with limits, whether that be speed or location. We talked about things like a tennis court isn't an appropriate place within a park to allow for an e-bike, but a trail may be. And so looking at that differentiation between those. And then option 3 would be allowing for children under the age of 18 to ride an electric scooter. So we brought this item forward to the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board. They reviewed it on February 9th, so two meetings ago, and they shared support for modifying the existing ordinance, really with both options 2 and 3, to allow for e-bikes, e-scooters to be utilized on sidewalks, trails, and/or in parks, and to allow children under the age of 18 to ride those devices. And I think Andy Hall, one of our Parks and Recreation Advisory Board members, is hanging out here with us tonight as well. So discussion and next steps. What are your options? Similar to the last slide. You can do nothing. You can make no changes. We would just update, like we talked about previously, to address OPDMDs and alignment with state statute. You could accept the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board recommendations to modify the code to remove the age restriction and allow use within designated locations on trails, sidewalks, and parks, in which case we would need to schedule a first reading. Or you can, based on conversation tonight and discussion, it could be some combination of those. You could modify the code to address only the age restriction or only use on trails, sidewalks, and parks, or some combination thereof. So with that, I would be happy to open it for questions and discussion.
Amanda, I believe everybody's hand went up all at once.
Perfect.
So I'm
Is
just
it all
going
the
to go
same
ahead and
question?
start
Because
on the
that would
end
make it
and work our way around here. Actually, Councilmember Long, your hand was not up, so
But
it is now.
would you like your hand up? Okay, great, you go first.
Well, wouldn't you know it? I get a call from someone said, what about golf carts? I think golf carts are safe, they're easy to drive, but I don't see them on the list, and I don't know if they were considered or not, but I did have a constituent give the call and was pretty adamant about it.
So currently, we do not allow for golf carts as within the definition of an OPDMD as a mobility device. Typically, a golf cart has occupancy of more than one, whereas most our OPDMD definition typically is only for a single rider. I would say that's consistent with most other communities. There are a few that do allow for golf carts. A lot of times they're very limited in location, and they're really looking at where do they block the trails. And so it may not allow or disallow a golf cart specifically, but like, I'm trying to think of it. I don't want to quote Brighton's, but I know Brighton defines their OPDMDs based on how much of the trail they take up, rather than specifically passengers.
And the other question I have, if I might, if you do allow for under age 18, how low will you go? 6 years old, 7-year-old? I mean,
I would suggest it's probably at a parent discretion.
parent discretion. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. Councilmember Jaramillo.
Thank you, Madam Mayor Pro Tem. So I would be in favor of the Parks and Rec recommendation, but I'd also look at, when we talk about, speed limit in the park, like in the past, Councilmember, I just looked at Becky and said, I'm sorry, Walker.
You're okay.
I'm sorry, I saw Becky, so I said her name. So I'd be in favor of speed limits, but also striping lanes. I could see that, like, let's say at around Webster Lake, similar to what you see at like Sloan's Lake but I would also say no to share use in Doctus. I've just seen them like thrown all over Washington, and it's a mess. So I would be,
We agree with you wholeheartedly.
Cool, so I'm glad that I'm on, Parks and Rec recommendation. We're all on the same page. But, so if, let's say like a speed limit, 20 is pretty fast, and that's the max for some of these. What would it be? Would it be 15 if we,
In some of the other policies we've reviewed, 15 seems to be a common number. I actually just spoke with someone from Thornton today who said if they were to adjust their ordinances, that they would likely focus that more on speed limits and the way those devices were used rather than the device itself.
Okay, and also, so park rangers and police on bikes, they would just treat it like,
So it would be treated as any other codified park rule.
Okay.
Our park rangers are able to provide friendly reminders and education. They don't issue citations. Our police officers would be able to issue a citation if the situation warranted.
okay, and I know they're probably not gonna get into like helmets or anything like that. It's probably at the discretion for parents as well.
I would say that at your discretion, some of the other communities' ordinances do identify a requirement for a helmet.
That- like, they are potentially dangerous, you know, so that's one of our rules.
No, that's,
Yeah. Sorry, I'm taking everybody's questions, but
We haven't
I'll
talked
save it.
specifically, but there's nothing that says we couldn't include a requirement for a helmet for a minor or else otherwise.
I'm sorry, I missed that. We were trying to arm wrestle. So,
I'm finished.
Are you still done?
I'm
You're
finished.
still talking? Okay, Councilmember Hondo.
so on the helmet thing, because what I see in a lot of the surveys, some responses are the danger. So what's the city's obligation to ensure safety in that regard? Maybe that's more of a
As I
question.
say, I'm going to defer that piece to Corey.
I guess I would characterize it this way. There is no potential liability to the city for not putting any sort of safety provisions in place. The city is immune from liability in this area. So the city can choose to regulate, but not regulating does not create liability.
Okay, so two kids crash into each other, not wearing helmets, they get injured. There's very little possibility of getting
Correct.
sued by
Well,
parents.
there's always a possibility we'll get sued. There is very little possibility it would be successful.
A successful suit. I understand. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Burns.
Yes, helmets, hot topic for the council. I'm a big fan of helmets as someone who, my uncle, his bike helmet saved his life when he was hit by a car. So big fan of helmets. And yeah, I've lived other places where when City Bike was first introduced to New York City, helmets were regulated. So you were supposed to have a helmet. Same thing in Los Angeles. And so just wondering, maybe it's something, I would be interested to know like what our cities around us offer. Like they advise for helmets like, 16 or something like that. But I agree with the Parks and Rec Board's recommendations of allowing younger kids to go out, especially like those like tier 1 e-bikes are pretty popular. I know we have a bunch of those businesses here in Colorado that offer those e-bikes. But yeah, I see danger. And so I think speed limits and helmets might be a good.
Thank you. Councilmember Goff.
Thank you. So I just want to clarify that those ATV type things are not addressed at all in this.
Correct.
Okay.
Those would be considered either a unlicensed vehicle or a vehicle, which are separate from this.
And I know we have code that addresses that. So then my next question is, I have an e-bike. So one of the things that I have uncertainties about, I can ride it on the street or I can ride it on the trails. Is that true for all of these things?
So right now, we're
I know, right now.
silent on e-bikes.
Yeah.
So there's nothing that says you can't.
But like the electric scooters, could kids ride them on the street? Or would they be required to be on the sidewalk? Or like, does it depend on, I'm just wondering about the difference in speed. Some of these don't go very fast. You probably wouldn't want them in the street, but I don't know. So how are we
I think that's
thinking about
verbiage we would want to work through in the ordinance. If you give us that direction to move forward, we would work through specific language. We have to make sure we're treating the e-bikes and the scooters. We can't regulate scooters more so than we're regulating e-bikes. And because that definition of a scooter is so broad
Right.
of 100 pounds or less, two-wheeled with a handlebar. It's everything from every single class of Razor scooter, from the weakest one to the strongest one, all the way to the same type of scooter you could get through a Lime rental, or, because you can purchase those outright as well. I don't recall the brand names off the top of my head, but that definition includes all of it.
Right, well, I would just say that I do agree with the Parks and Rec Board recommendation to look into that further and write the ordinance. And then the helmets for minors is, I think, an important, and I was kind of going back and forth in my mind because some of their scooters and things don't go very fast. But if they were to be hit by a car, if they were going to be allowed to be in the street, then we would probably want them to have a helmet.
Just speaking from personal experience, my kids have one. It feels really fast. I know mine aren't allowed to ride them without a helmet, but that's my own personal requirement of them. I can't imagine them riding without them, whether they're on a sidewalk or a street.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's totally personal anecdote.
I'm definitely a fan of the helmets as well. Councilmember Brown?
I have a couple questions, and I want to just touch on, I have a concern about letting electric bikes and scooters in the park. Specifically, I want to talk to Webster Lake. And, it's all the parks, but Webster Lake is where I've had my experience. If you remember, I got stopped by the park ranger because I was riding one, just testing it out. But here's my thing, as I have been home more and more during the summers, I've spent the last 2 summers at home, I am out in the parks with the girls, right? And my concern is a toddler or a child, the girl's age 5 or 6, they're running from the playground, they're running over to the pavilions, they're running everywhere. And they, because they're so small, they're not really good with that look to the left, look to the right thing. And my concern is for a park like E.B. Raines, where we are really promoting mothers and their children, and there's so much to do that there with the new sensory pads and things like that. My experience being up there is that there's a lot of distractions. So I am leaning more towards not having them in the parks, just because there's so many people in there and there are distractions, and it's mostly for the little ones that I have that concern for. I get complaints about, different things in the park, and I can imagine if the population of bikes and scooters starts to increase in the park, that's going to lead to more complaints of parents not feeling safe, having their children play because there are so many, scooters or bikes. I was counting them the other day because I also want one, I'm really getting out on that excitement part. But I think for my own benefit, I would not ride them in the parks because of the kids that are around, The other thing that I think that we really need to look at is whether the electric scooters or the scooters are allowed to ride on the street. That concerns me because of all the different, they go through the same thing as with the bikes, that one I was on hauled butt, but some of them don't. And then you start having the ones that are not electric powered in any way or gas powered. And I have a real concern about letting them ride it in the street. When I was young, there was an age before you could ride your bike out on the street, and we had to go to the police department and do this whole little test and everything. But I realize we don't do that kind of stuff now, but the reason there was an age was to keep us safe, right?
So you're speaking specifically to minors in
Minors,
bike lanes
yeah.
or roadways?
Yeah, I just, my grandson rides his longboard home every day. And he rides it on the sidewalk because I caught him riding it in the bike lane and I yelled at him, I just don't think that we want people under a certain age out there on the street, We are very responsible parents and grandparents, and we know that. But we also have that section of the community that may not be as vigilant as we are with helmets and things like that. And we have an obligation to protect those children too. And the cars on the street. So those are my 2 real big concerns. So I would not be in favor of letting them be in the park. That's my big one. And my second big one would be allowing anybody to ride them in the street under a specific age, whether that age is 12, 15, you know what I mean? They have to be old enough to understand the rules of the road. And that one that I was test driving in the park, that was given to a 8-year-old for her birthday. So next thing we know, we're gonna have an 8-year-old out on the street driving through through the bike lane, riding her scooter, and that makes me really nervous.
So I would ask then for some council feedback on that. Where's everybody at? Would there be a desire to exclude parks from that list or to limit ages as it relates to bike lanes and roadways? Currently, I can't speak. Currently, the e-bikes and e-scooters are allowed on the roadways, but no minors are allowed to ride scooters. E-bikes were silent on, so that would be something we could certainly clean up in this.
Great. Amanda, I'm actually going to let Councilmember Walker. Councilmember Brown, are you done?
Yes, ma'am.
Just checking, thank you. Councilmember Walker.
Thank you. Amanda, great job on the reach out. I thought that was great that you kept it real simple with the residents. I think we got some good feedback. Sadly, unfortunately, I think the Parks and Rec recommendation ignores, and it sounds like I'm going to be the only one up here to voice this concern too, the significant amount of people who had issue with riding e-bikes on the sidewalk. I think having them in the parks and being able to to go through North Glen on the Greenway Trail is a great addition to our Connect North Glen and things like that. I think it will help get across the city quicker. But sadly, I don't want us to go back one day and then I do want to see us take off the sidewalk park because I don't want it taking a dog or a kid getting ran over, which probably will happen if they're allowed on the sidewalks. They're not really allowed on the sidewalks in most other places. I don't think allowing them on residential sidewalks here will do us any good either. So I'd like to see that part removed. And like I said, there was a significant amount of people who had issues with them on sidewalks. Seems like everybody's okay with them in the roads, parkways, and trails. I understand your concerns, Councilmember Brown, but sidewalks is where people started to draw the line pretty heavily.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. So for clarification, and I'll get to you next, Councilmember Long. What I'm hearing that there's some consensus for option 2, but some of the concerns that have been raised are yes, but not in our parks or on our streets, for minors specifically. And from Councilmember Walker, not on the sidewalks, but yes, on the trails. So that is an alternative for us to discuss whether we would want to allow them on sidewalks or not allow them on sidewalks, or just minors not allowed on sidewalks or in the parks. Something to think about that staff needs consensus on. Councilmember Long.
Thank you. Hearing my colleagues share their thoughts, I triggered some of my own. On sidewalks, many is the time you're walking and some of these bike riders can go pretty fast. And their courtesy is they all have a bell. And typically they ring their bell and then you scoot to the right and they're zooming past. I wonder if you'd had something like that, some kind of rule of the road to let people know you're coming if they're coming up from behind. Just a thought. The other thought is, I see a lot of folks, and skateboarders also, that run their pets with their bikes and their skateboards. And I'm wondering if they have pets in tow on a leash, if that is something that might be a little bit dicey when it comes to safety. I can see that happening because we've had some near collisions that way too. And these dogs are running and panting and keeping up with their bike rider owners. And I'm just wondering if attaching a leash to one of these electric scooters might be a hazardous occupation to pursue. So other than that, I'm leaning to support what's being shared by other councilmen here in terms of their reservations. I think that Mayor Pro Tem is outlining it fairly well. So I support that logic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Long. Councilmember Burns?
Yes. So my thing is, a lot of our sidewalks in the neighborhoods are very narrow, so you couldn't even really fit an e-bike or anything on them, let alone have two people, like if someone's coming a different way, like, so I kind of agree with Councilmember Walk on this. And I also though wonder about connectivity and flow for our residents, right? If you're coming off the Greenway Trail, at least by where I live, up Grand, the bike lane ends. And then what do? Where do you go? You have to get off the bike and walk? Like, because the bus stop is right around the corner, right? Like, say you're going to that bus stop on 104th. Like what is the flow? That's the thing I'm kind of getting caught up on with sectioning, like, no sidewalk, I don't know. I feel like there's some issues there.
And there is some existing language, and I think we could play with that language that talks about roadway must be used unless there's not roadway available, and then can defer to an adjacent trail where posted. So we haven't used that language, but that could be maybe a tool. Because I agree with you, there's a connectivity challenge, right? If you're going from your home to even as a kid, right? If a kid's riding from their home to school, the likelihood is there's going to be some area that is on a residential sidewalk and some that's on a trail. And so if you're not on the residential sidewalk, you're probably on the adjacent roadway. So how do we avoid those conflicts in
Yeah. I was
connectivity?
just thinking for my house, like, I'm not gonna fit on the sidewalks in my neighborhood. I immediately have to go into the street until I can get to my bike lane to get to the Greenway Trail. And then like a bus stop or something, and then like back in the street. Yeah, so I would love, just like, we can do some inclusive language. I know, some trails that I've been on, it's like, they have the dismount sections, where it's like, here's where you have to like get off your skateboard or bike and that sort of thing, so maybe something like that too. On the Greenway Trail, so like before crossing or like maybe our visitors.
Thank you. We still have lots of hands up. Councilmember Jaramillo?
Thank you, Madam Mayor Pro Tem. So as for the parks, I can see, like, as I mentioned before, striping, and if there's a way that we can have it, it's, right lane is intended as the slow lane, and left lane, you can pass when safe, like as we treat a lot of other one-lane highways, let's say. That might be one way, like we try to create that, where when possible, understanding that people are on the right side, it's gonna be the opposite when they're walking the other direction, so it's like, okay, when it's safe. So I'm just trying to play the scenario through my head, like, just to try to accommodate, a lot of these safety concerns. So that's one that I have. I do also agree that our sidewalks are narrow. I've grown up trying to ride my bike or my scooter or my skateboard or rollerblades on there. And, yep, 90s, baby. So I do understand I was always riding my bike in the street before bike lanes was really even a thing. We didn't have motorized ones, so I mean, that's an added concern. So I can see that, I don't have kids myself, but I can, empathize for your safety concerns for those who have children and grandchildren. With that said, I mean, a lot of this really comes down to parenting, I feel. If you want your kids to ride the scooter or the e-bike or to wear their helmet or whatever, it's really, I feel a lot of this is up to the parents. And I think if I ask people my age that have kids, they might say the same thing. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. I still have a couple of hands. Councilmember Goff.
Thank you. So in terms of allowing these electronic vehicles in the park, do we allow regular bicycles in the park?
We currently do, yes.
Yeah, and that's why I think if you're going to allow regular bicycles, then e-bikes should also be allowed, because real bikes can go just as fast. So that's my 2 cents on that one. It's just like less regulations, the better. I know I use the trail that's on the other side of the canal, I guess. And so maybe I'm not actually in Webster Lake Park, but I just don't see that there's a need to make that be an extra regulation unless we're going to also include regular bikes. Which, you know, I could hear an argument for that. And then I'm really confused with some of the concerns about, we don't want kids to ride in the streets, but then we don't want e-bikes on the sidewalk. So I think that needs to be kind of worked out in some way. Because, I don't think most people, in terms of the e-bikes, those are usually on the streets anyway, because of for a lot of the reasons that we've also heard. I don't know if you need to clarify that or specify that, but do we have a rule about regular bikes? Can they go on sidewalks? I mean, in some places you have to, like we talked about. So I just feel like the e-bike thing should be more compared to regular bike. And then the whole issue of like the kids riding these electronic things, maybe it has some separate rule. I'm not exactly sure what those are, but.
Hey, Councilmember Kondo, thanks for your patience.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. So with all due respect to the staff, I just want to think aloud here. I'm not trying to micromanage you or provide suggestions. First of all, I do agree with Dr. Goff in principle. I am also trying to figure out how to accommodate Councilmember Brown's concern. And it sounds like it's mostly around the E.B. Rains Park, unless there are other parks.
Well, that's where I hang out the most.
Yeah, so I'm just thinking to myself, maybe, again, just in the interest of getting my head wrapped around this, maybe there's a bicycle scooter dismount zone around the Sensory Park area pavilions. Again, I'm not, I'm just trying to figure out, as Dr. Goff said, let's not over-regulate, but let's be reasonable. And so if Councilmember Brown's main concern is E.B. Rains and around the Sensory Park and the pavilions, perhaps there's a way to kind of accommodate. And that's the direction that I would like to provide staff. Thank you.
Great. So we've kind of been a little bit all over the place. Thank you so much for your patience, Amanda, but these are really great concerns and great, I think, solutions as well. So some of the things that I heard, if we were to allow minors, so remove that rule, right, for children under 18 to ride e-scooters, that there be some kind of stipulation that they ride helmets. We discussed the roadway versus the sidewalks, but as was brought forward, and please feel free to add to this at any point in time, it's not quite clear cut how, you know, that would flow, as Councilmember Burns brought up initially. So maybe there's some kind of dismount area as a solution as well. It's the second thing I heard. And just really making sure that language is very inclusive and very specific in terms of where the dismount sections are. I heard striping, which we've seen in other cities in terms of helping to kind of manage the flow if we were to allow these on the trail specifically. So having some kind of a two-way system where it's very clear, you stay on the right, you stay on the left, don't cross my lane kind of thing unless you give fair warning. Let me see. So all of these are pretty much option threes or fours. They're alternative options from the ones that were presented, but I think they're all great if we were to allow scooters for children under 18. I think that's one of the biggest things that staff needs consensus on. Amanda, do you have any questions in terms of clarification that you still need?
I think just a little bit. So I'm hearing, yes, minors, maybe with some language around helmets included. Yes, on dismount zones specific to areas possibly within parks like the Sensory Playground. And I think we could address that through a map of areas that then could be adapted or changed over time. The striping piece, I think, would probably make the most sense maybe to do as a pilot somewhere. Rather than including it in the ordinance, I think that piece might be a little more operational, that can be modified as we're seeing compliance or lack of compliance. I think the biggest question I still have is around sidewalks. I think that one I didn't hear clear direction on.
Show of hands, if
Well,
you,
wait, I'm sorry.
would you like to add something? Go
I
ahead,
still have
Councilmember
my
Goff.
concern about, if we say not on the sidewalks, is that meeting the children also, the minors?
That's what
That's
we're
my
getting to.
concern. I mean,
Would it be possible to have something that literally says, over 16 only,
Well,
and no minors on sidewalk or?
the thing is, the speed, I thought was really is the danger issue.
I missed that, that's on here.
So I think that you either just say not on the sidewalks or you don't say anything. I just don't see this. Some people here and some people there is just, it's so confusing. And I'm fine with not on the sidewalks, but.
And it's, monitoring and enforcing these rules is going to be near to impossible, right? So as we're thinking about it, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to jump on Catherine's thing.
Go ahead.
But as I'm thinking about it, maybe the answer is to keep it as simple as possible. Because in all honesty, we're not really going to be able to enforce these rules, Our park rangers would be put into a situation, and then they'd have to call the police in to give tickets and things like that. So I don't know, now I'm all confused.
There was definitely a lot, including the 15 mile per hour. I left that one out as one of the options that council brought up as an example. So where are we at? I guess the biggest question that,
I support Ms. Catherine, but not on the sidewalks, but we need to just keep it simplified across the board.
Not on the
Nobody's gonna be
sidewalks?
checking IDs on
Right,
bicycles.
right.
not on the sidewalks, streets, trails, parks, okay?
Yes.
And maybe a 15-mile speed limit on the.
Right, I agree.
Something
And the
like
parks.
So, I just don't, I understand that the sidewalks are narrow and everything, but, they should ideally be safer than the street, like, if, let's say, like, little ones, let's say, like, you have them, like, on some kind of, I know they're probably not gonna be on these, electric bikes or whatnot, but, so so it's only the residential ones, it's not like going up Washington or up here on
Typically,
the-
they're roadways with a speed limit of 35 miles per hour or less.
Okay, so
And you could set that lower if you would like, I would presume.
35 miles per hour, so that include Irma
I-
too.
The more simple, the better.
Yeah, I
It's getting out of control here, Henry.
No,
I think that's kind of backwards in a way too, but.
We have a lot going on here.
Well, it's also for the constituents. We're trying to make rules that are easy to follow, not only from an enforcement perspective, but in terms of messaging to the people that are going to be subject to these. So it is I would suggest it's much easier to make these as simple as possible.
So what I'm hearing, simple would be to allow them everywhere but on the sidewalks. There is already language, if I'm remembering this correctly, that says unless it's not safe to do so. Something along those lines. I thought you mentioned this.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and look at the language, and we can take a look when we do the updates. But it references if it's not allowed on the roadway, if there isn't a bike lane available, then an adjacent trail is the alternative.
Would that be-
Councilmember Walker?
Go ahead. Sorry,
would that be-
Councilmember Hondo?
Sorry, thank you, Mayor. Would that be adjacent trail or sidewalk? Say, for example, the scenario that Councilmember Burns brought up, trying to get to the bus stop. There's no trail, the striped trailway ends, so therefore, passenger of the bicycle now needs to get onto the sidewalk, finally finish that last 50 feet.
Wouldn't that address that piece?
Typically we haven't said sidewalk, we've said trail, which is a really fine
Yeah,
line in
there's no
some places.
trail that
Well, but then you
completes
just.
that.
But then you have a
to get to-
roadway
Yeah,
that's
then you have a
general,
road.
you typically would have a residential roadway that would be available.
Okay, so they'd stay on the road to get to the bus stop.
Councilmember Walker?
Thank you, Ms. Shannon. Ms. Amanda, just a quick question. This to kind of bring it back to where this all got started at the ward meeting, because we've all gotten wrapped around the scooter thing. This came from like little rascal scooters. Now, all I see in here addressing that, and just forgive me if I'm wrong here, is that we're going to broaden the definition of when they can be used. So is that going to be in the ordinance saying, basically, this was a resident asking, can I use my rascal at EB Rain?
So yes, this would allow
Because
for.
everything got
that
wrapped
was-
around the scooter thing real quick, and then forgot about why we got here. So I just want to make sure that's in.
We definitely didn't forget about it, but because you all reached consensus so easily on that
just wanna
part of
make
it, at the last meeting, we felt like we had clear direction on those OPDMDs. So that's why they weren't a big piece
Yes.
of tonight's conversation.
Thank you so much. Yeah, like little rascal scooters.
Because I'm thinking,
Okay, are there any further questions or anything that council members would like to add? What I'm hearing is to keep it as simple as possible, yes? But not allow it on the sidewalks is what the majority consensus agreed upon. Councilmember
Can
Walker, you
just
look,
repeat that one last, make sure.
to allow e-bikes and scooters on the trails, the parks, the streets, but not the sidewalks.
With some dismount zones,
With
as I
some
understood it,
dismount
in
zones.
certain parks. And then 15-mile-an-hour speed limit, helmets
allow that.
required for minors, and perhaps striping as a pilot program not included in the ordinance.
That sounds great. That seems to capture what everybody said. Does anyone have anything else to add? Okay. Does staff have the direction that they need?
Yes, I appreciate that. I know there's a lot of nuance to that one, so I appreciate your patience tonight.
That was a great discussion. Thank you so much, Amanda.
Thank you.
City Manager Guyer, is that clear?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Great. Moving on to our next item agenda, we have Parkview Townhomes parking issue, and our Director of Planning and Development, Brooke Svoboda, will present the information to council. Welcome, Brooke.
Good evening. How is everybody?
hi, Brooke, how you doing?
Full of ideas.
Next
The
year, talking about
excitement
parking.
is just palpable. All right. So here we go. So the purpose of this is to provide a response to the March 13th public comment regarding the Parkview Townhomes parking issue. I do want to point out that this is the Parkview area townhome development. It's approximately 132 units with 305 parking spaces. And this is the EB Rains parking lot right here. And right over here is our wonderful city hall. Okay, so I went back through and listened to the public comments, and between the two public comments, trying to encapsulate all the commentary that was provided. And so this is sort of just a brief list of those things, changes made by the HOA regarding parking. And also, there was a reference to recent changes to the parking lots at Webster Lake, restrictions to overnight parking on city property, the referenced email that I prepared, and then requesting a parking permit system for city-owned property, and then also to reach out to the HOA for more effective parking. There we go. Okay. Changes made by the HOA. So just as a matter of policy, we do not regulate private parking, and that we have had no communication with the HOA, other than the email response that I prepared, which, as far as I know, was not an HOA member there. I can tell you from a building department, we've had one interaction with a backed-up sanitary line on one of the properties, and that's like really the only thing. This particular property's never been on a code enforcement radar, so just to mention that. Okay, so recent changes to the parking lots at Webster Lake. There really hasn't been any recent changes. As a matter of principle, no parking after the park closure. And I reached out to Amanda, and there was additional language added to the Parks and Regulation sign about no overnight parking in 2020. Restrictions to overnight parking on city property. It wasn't very clear whether, I believe it was the tenant was making reference to city property or their property, But for purposes, or the townhome property, but for our purposes tonight, I just want to clarify to the council that we do not have tow companies patrolling city parking lots and towing them. So I suspect that the commentary was in regards to what the HOA was doing for on-site parking. And I just want to mention that as a result of the comments about the RV parking overnight, the PD has stepped up patrols to stay on top of that.
So I'm sorry, is that an issue that we actually were seeing? Because I hadn't seen it, but I don't come by
I believe
here
that it's one of those things where you hit it for a while and it goes away and then it slowly starts coming back. But I do know that I believe part of the testimony is at the public comment is that there was an RV that was parking overnight. And so we had PD go out there and sort of step it up and make sure that that's not happening. But as you know, RVs like of that nature of people experiencing homelessness will rotate around. And so I can tell you that just in my neighborhood, you can see the same vehicle move around. They're very strategic about how they manage themselves in that way. And then also, as I mentioned in my opening comments, the email's there for your information. This was not in response to anything from the two folks that came to the council meeting to speak. This was another party that I was responding to based on a council member referral, so. Whoa.
Wow.
I did not do that.
Over.
Uh-oh.
That was magical.
We're back to National Night Out.
I'm just holding the remote here.
You had a power
So,
surge.
National Night Out.
It's my presence. It's just,
Totally.
It's your energy.
hold back, Eric.
I was thinking you wanted me to volunteer to help patrol the parking lot at night, you know?
You know which slide he was on?
Brooke, while we're waiting for that, so how many actual calls
On 13.
have we had in that area? For example, the RV was something that was mentioned, but has there been a lot of?
I mean, I would defer to the PD on that because we don't, code enforcement typically, since it's on park or city-owned land, we typically don't respond to those. And also, we work day shift, we don't have a night shift, so I would say that the majority of that would probably come in through PD.
Great, you're back.
You did it once?
Or are we?
Maybe.
Okay, so parking permit system was suggested. And I also want to mention that in the staff report, we make reference to our current parking permit regulations. They actually work in the reverse. What we typically do is that if there is a institutional use or commercial use or industrial use that has an impact in a neighborhood, we have a parking permit program, which basically says residents are the only ones allowed to park in that area. We don't have any parking permit system policy in place today about regulating or allowing people to park on city-owned land throughout the city. So this would be an entirely different direction for policy in that regard. I also want to mention that none of the properties in this corridor between City Hall and Melody, or Malley, excuse me, are underparked. And as I mentioned in the staff report, 3 of the multifamily properties have actually restriped their parking over the years, and they actually are in excess of what they would otherwise be required for. And as I mentioned in the staff report, right now with land use policymaking principles, it's trying to drive down parking spaces and create more open space. We have that 25% bonus. Almost all the properties within this corridor are within a half mile of the Wagon Road station, and so they would have been eligible for a 25% reduction, but none of them have those in place. So this is all background for the fact that basically there's not an under-parking issue per se when it comes to the regulations. And as I mentioned in the staff report, one of the things here is that what we're seeing as a general trend, and this was part of our housing study, is that people are staying in place, and there's usually more than one family living in a residence, and typically it's unrelated couples. And so those people generally have more vehicles than the two, because once again, the concept between multifamily is that you have a family living in a single residence. our dynamics have changed over time, but that nobody is technically underparked.
Brooke, I do have a couple of hands.
Please go ahead.
If it's okay. All right. I had Councilmember Condo, please.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. So I'll just anecdotally say that I think I've received probably a handful of emails from a variety of the apartments along the community center drive during my tenure. So that kind of gives you a flavor, two of which I worked with you on. So that, from my perspective, that's what I've heard. I don't know if Dr. Goff has.
No, it's about the same.
And I can tell you that Carrick Bend, when they went in, pushed really hard to reduce the parking requirements and was more aligned with what our current regs are. And they weren't even fully leased, and they went out and restriped their entire parking area. It was in and around the same time that Stone Mountain restriped their entire parking area. The Reserve, when they did their expansion, they actually added more spaces above and beyond what they were required, and they took out 2 of the buildings that they were going to build, that they were legally entitled to do. They did not build to accommodate for parking. So it is a real issue, it's a real challenge from that perspective. So, and as I mentioned in the staff report, we saw people parking in the City Hall parking lots about 5 years ago, and it became a real issue.
Councilmember Goff.
Okay, thank you. This is exactly why I think we need to look at this a little more closely. I understand that the idea of having like less parking spaces if you have buildings by public transportation because you're trying to encourage public transportation. However, RTD does not offer the transportation that people want. I do not want to have to go all the way downtown and then get something else to go somewhere else. It doesn't work. And because of the cost of housing, people are really doubling up on housing. I mean, people in my neighborhood have 4 adults living in a house, and they each have a vehicle. And that's just kind of the way it is. I mean, you could have a 2-bedroom house, even if it's a couple and a college kid, or like you were saying, 2 couples in a house, unrelated maybe. I think that we might need to look at requiring more parking than we currently do in our code. And I would say that this idea that you're going to come to about making parking on Community Center Drive, I would hate to see that. But whatever we're going to be doing to develop this area around here, there's already not enough parking, and when we're done, there won't be enough parking. So I think whatever we can do to get more parking, we need to do.
Thank you. I have one more question. Councilmember Long.
I have 2 things for you, Brooke. One is to reinforce your point of view when it talks about the last sentence on option 3. Adding 57 spaces will likely not alleviate the parking needs, and the impact on traffic would be significant. And 57 out of 2,200, that's 2.6% addition. That's not going to do it. So I concur and support your point of view there. I have one question. That has to do with Boondocks. Have you had any complaints or heard anything from Boondocks in terms of people parking in their parking lot there?
They have their property signed, and like many commercial properties, we have the ability to go out and do the enforcement. The LDS property, there's been a long-standing position from those folks that they do not wish to share or utilize their parking in the neighborhoods at all. Multiple people have gone and reached out to them over the years that I've been here.
Okay, thank you.
Those were all the hands, Brooke.
Okay. So the reach out to the HOA for more effective parking, from a staff perspective, really this is an HOA issue between them and the tenant. I guess the only anecdote that I would add to that is we're trying to solve a problem using public property that's a private property issue. I think that's Pandora's box in a sense, because then are we opening up every other area of city-owned land for off-street parking for private purposes, Northwest Open Space, JC Ball Field? It's like, what does that look like, and how does that take shape? So, And then we have the options here. Homeowner work with the HOA, the parking on city-owned land, which would be a permitting process, and then evaluate on-street parking with Community Center Drive. And I want to mention that the on-street parking with Community Center Drive was like the out-of-the-box thinking option here. And I would say that I don't think that we would, through a traffic study, the impact to the roadway network would be substantial. That center turn queue lane during the peak hour is what really helps people get in and out without affecting the through traffic. So everybody's nodding their head, so, okay. I won't belabor the point.
Councilmember Brown.
My opinion, in a nutshell, we should not be involved in homeowner-resident complaints. They need to take care of themselves with their HOA, and that's what word I left out. They are they have all the parking places they need. You know, we should never allow parking from a residence into city-owned land. It's a terrible situation to get ourselves in. Of course, Councilmember Walker wanted to charge a monthly fee. But for those of us on the NURA board, know what it's like to be landlords. No, thank you. And parking on Community Center Drive, you know where I'm gonna go with that, right? That road is a CLUSTER, trying to get through it on busy times, and I would hate to take any width away from that street. So I am in favor of saying that this is not a city issue and making no changes to anything, except for if overnight parking of RVs and things like that, DC, if that becomes an issue, then I think that's brought as a separate subject.
We've been monitoring the park for that. We've had a couple of different complaints. Our officers were out there the other day and did not find it out in the park, so it's on their agenda to check on a nightly basis. We do find it, we'll cite. And we'll
Okay, yeah, I really would hate to see that become an issue, you know, now that we're not going to have the help over at the old rec center. I really don't want to see that happening, so I'm glad that you're on top of it. Thank you, those are my opinions.
Councilmember Walker.
Thank you. Mr. Corey, forgive my ignorance, sir, here. On option number 2 here, or if we do this overnight parking permit system, where does that put the city? I mean, parking on city-owned land, and this car catches fire, and
No, I'm not worried about that at all. I mean, but to Brooke's point, it is sort of the reverse of what our permitting system does now, like, for example, by North Glen High School. It's not what this parking was intended for. But those issues are the same issues we have with temporary parking. There's no additional concerns with overnight parking.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Goff.
Okay, I got a couple of things. One is, and I'm not saying we want to do this, but I have family that lives in Illinois, and there's the towns they live in. Every resident gets 2 parking permit stickers that they put in their car, and that allows them to park on the street overnight, and if you don't have it. So is that what this is coming to, or is that not what this is?
I would say that that's a different issue.
Okay.
But I will say that, you know, Denver has that in Capitol Hill and other neighborhoods. Cherry Creek is another neighborhood that they have that, and it is strictly enforced. I used to live in Capitol Hill, and I can honestly tell you that, man, if you don't got your permit, you're gonna have a ticket.
Near Mile High Stadium was the same thing, because I lived there, same
Yes,
thing.
absolutely.
But I don't think we have that kind of an issue in our city. So I just want to say, I don't think the city needs to do anything to address this. It just doesn't sound like it's really in our ballpark. But I would say that, again, that whatever the civic center plan is, that we really have to strongly look at parking, because whatever we build, like the plans that we've seen just generally in the past for this area, it will immediately fill up. The parking will immediately fill up. These people in these apartments or whatever, they'll come over and they'll park where they can find a place to park. So we'll have to really think seriously about that.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, Brooke, I have to concur with what I've heard. At first, I was definitely thinking about what a permitting system would look like, but after really thinking about just the kind of conundrum that it would create in terms of well, there's all of these other homes and apartment complexes and townhome complexes that would also potentially want more parking. And it just seems like it would just be a spiral that never ends. So I definitely concur with that. I agree with Councilmember Goff that we absolutely need to be so careful with our planning for the Civic Center campus. And I know that's a huge part of consideration. I heard even parking garage might have to be an option. Who knows, right? That's still up for discussion. But what I'm hearing, I think, unless somebody would like to add in, is that this is a homeowner resident issue that should stay in that realm to work with the HOA. It's a private matter. Is that the consensus that I'm hearing from everyone? Okay. You need anything
And I'm
else?
going to advance the slide and hopefully safely. Here we go.
Thank you
very
so
much.
much. Thank you, Brooke. Appreciate it. And we've made it to our last item on the agenda, which is our parks naming policy, and we have Amanda Peterson back. Welcome, Amanda.
Good evening.
Again.
All right, the purpose of this discussion is to review our current park naming policy and discuss any potential modifications that you all may like to see to that. This arose from questions that kind of came up during the naming of Odell Berry Park, not necessarily directly related to that, but just what that process was, because it was the first time we'd used it in some time. The existing policy was adopted in 1986 and then modified in October of 2009. Since 2009, we've used that policy, I believe, about 4 times. 3 of those 4 times, the naming has resulted in naming, or the request has resulted in naming a feature within a park, and 1 time it's resulted in the naming of a park that had no formal name. So our current criteria, and I'll try to go through these pretty quickly because I think most of you have seen them before. This is really just a summary of the existing ordinance. So the process includes a written proposal that's submitted to our Parks and Recreation Advisory Board. Anyone who's interested, whether it be a group of citizens, a city board or commissions, can submit at any point in time. So there's not a call, there's not, if you want to submit a name, that can happen at any regular Parks and Recreation Advisory Board meeting. And then there's a 90-day evaluation period in place. The board is tasked with identifying alternatives. Like I mentioned on that previous slide, the previous 4 naming policies, 3 of those resulted in an alternative, being a trail or the skate park versus the park as a whole. And that there are some limits to renaming. Generally, those that are named for an individual aren't intended to be renamed unless that person does something that would poorly represent the city and a decision is made to rename, then there's that option to rename. And a park name for a geographic location or a feature can be renamed after a period of 10 years. So something like North, South, and Central Park, those were named really neutrally to allow for a renaming to occur at a point that made sense for the city. Criteria continued. Within that existing policy identifies that contributions, if named after an individual, should be extensive and substantial. Doesn't really define what extensive and substantial is, but does give some examples of years of service, monetary donation, or significant contribution to the community. Once that 90-day evaluation period has passed, the board submits a recommendation to City Council, and if there's a desire to make that action official, Council has to pass a resolution to do so. So before we kind of jump in, any questions on how the current policy works? All right.
Was that followed with Odell Berry?
Yes, it was.
To a point it was, and that's why I had brought this up. So I'm going to shut up and I'm going
Okay.
to sit here and wait.
All right. So other policies. Staff conducted a review of about 30 other policies from primarily around Colorado, but some from across the nation as well. Our current policy really is pretty aligned with those other policies. They tended to be a board recommendation followed by council authorization or formalization of those. They accept nominations or petitions similar to our process. And their priorities were similar, either geographic location, significant contribution, or historical significance. One of the noted differences we saw was some definition around what a significant contribution was, specifically when it was monetary. It was interesting to see some of those were at 50 or 51% of the cost of construction. Obviously, that's really significant. And some included some staff review or recommendation layers as well. So this next set of slides, these are I'm sorry, I am one slide behind where I was talking, are some observations. So these aren't positive or negative, just things that either staff noticed or that we heard from council or Parks and Rec Advisory Board members or others during our most recent utilization of the process. One is that all of our naming is nomination or petition based. So there isn't currently any allowance for like a call for names for a park space or a feature within a park. And I would liken that to when we named the street in front of, on Memorial Parkway and North Glen Way, we did a call for names. Technically, there's not anything in the policy that says yes or no to that. The terms extensive and substantial, we don't define those specifically. The policy is not specific to Parks and Recreation facilities, so not necessarily, again, not a pro or a con, just an observation. It doesn't limit the naming for individuals to those that are deceased. I know that was a question that had come up. It doesn't specify what should occur during that 90-day waiting period, right? The board and staff have interpreted that as meaning it's a public engagement period, so it was included on agendas for Parks and Recreation Advisory Board each month. There was an article in The Connection, there was advertisement on social media, but the policy itself doesn't outline what is anything to be required. Our policy also doesn't provide any authority to staff to name any smaller facilities. So since the policy references parks and then allows for the naming of other spaces, current policy doesn't really say like that staff can name the pavilions for wayfinding purposes. So we had some conversation with our Parks and Recreation Advisory Board initially on March 9th. We had some follow-up conversation just with this presentation to make sure we heard them correctly on just this past Thursday on April 13th. Generally, they were in support of the existing policy, but did recommend some minor modifications based on those observations. One was to identify communication that should occur, not necessarily that it has to be in the connection or that it has to be on an agenda, but in general that there's public outreach that's done during that time frame. The second was to allow, I wrote naming contest here, but really a naming contest or a call for names to occur for some spaces when appropriate. And then the third was allowance for staff level approval for wayfinding purposes, typically things that could be renamed and would fall under that category of geographic location, or I would use the example of the pavilions, they're all named after trees, but doesn't indicate that they couldn't be renamed if there was a petition brought forward. So the options that you have before you tonight, you can leave a policy alone. It doesn't have to be changed. You could consider the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board recommendations that we just reviewed, or there can be other discussion and recommendations amongst council.
Great.
With that, I will open it up for discussion.
Thank you, Amanda. Let's see, Councilmember Walker.
Thank you. Ms. Amanda, I'd like to maybe add another little bullet point for you. So the recommendations about recommended minor modifications for allowance for staff level approval for wayfinding purposes. Just want to make sure that it's clear in there that, you know, there can't be naming after a person, like a room.
Correct.
Okay.
It would be, I would liken it to, we technically named community rooms 1, 2, and 3. We were very broad in naming them 1, 2, and 3. But yes, I would suggest that be worked into that resolution language to specify that it's for wayfinding purposes and should not signify an individual.
Okay, thank you so much.
Councilmember Brown.
Amanda, do we need to acknowledge the memorial benches in this at all? Like almost an afterthought, but that this is an option? I don't think that Parks and Recreation should handle any of that. But I'm just wondering, because a lot of people, a lot of residents, don't know that we actually do things like that. It's limited, I think, but.
I guess I would ask Corey to confirm this, but I would think that it's already within the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board's purview to make a recommendation that rather than that, as they're asked to consider other things, whether beyond just the park, whether it be a facility within, I would think that memorial benches would fall in that category.
I'm okay
It
with.
wouldn't require coming then to council for further action.
Right, exactly. I don't think there are any changes to this policy that need to be made, but I do think that we need to make sure that people adhere to it. I did have problems with the way the naming of Odell Berry Park was done, you know, and I was very vocal about it at the time. Odell Berry asked that we create a bench for his wife when we bought that property. So that was his ask and that was the family's ask. Then it didn't seem like we were following a cadence on it. Someone from the Dice Board actually made the announcement on the news that this is Odell Berry's park, which she may have been confused that that was not her.
She didn't say that, the newscast.
I watched it, she said
I
it.
watched it.
My point is that those kind of announcements should come from the city. So there needs to be something in our cadence that we are the ones, you know, because it hadn't even come to council for a vote yet, when it was already out that it was going to be named that. I would have voted for it, but I would have had questions along with it. And once the announcement was out there in the public, I didn't feel that it was my place to question whether this park was going to be named after him. But his original request, he did want a park, and then he came back and he said, you know, as long as you give my lovely wife a bench when we purchased that property. He was okay with that. I just want to tie down this process. Because I had started to hear a rumor that we were looking at renaming other parks in the city. And at that point, when I started to hear that from people, I thought, well, you know what? And I'm going to take ownership for this, you know, wanting to go through this, that renaming parks really has to be a community decision, I think. And there has to be a reason. You know, I just don't think that even as a resident of the city of Northglenn, that we need to rename parks for situations now. You know what I'm saying? But those are my two thoughts. Those were my two concerns. The talk about renaming park names that are already existing and how, because we hadn't done it in a long time, I felt like we weren't in sync with how we were handling Odell Berry Park, right? Totally fine with it. I want to make sure that residents understand that. But we weren't in sync in following the process. And you know me, I'm very process-driven. I also want to make sure that things are, you know, that everybody gets an opportunity to speak to it. I know it was in the connection, but it wasn't in the connection in the respect of, would you like to do this? It was in the connection as, this is what we're doing, right? I do like the slide where you showed the call out, right? I thought that was a really good idea to call out when we're creating new parks and things like that. What would you like to see it as? I did really like that, but I don't think any changes need to be made. I just think that as boards and commissions change members and things like that, that we just have to remember that there is a process in place for naming parks. And I like that park names can be changed every 10 years, but I really do think that our citizens need to really be made aware that this is something that we're looking at, right? Because maybe they, you know, maybe they always want to know Wyco Park is Wyco Park, and the reason, you know, Wyco Park is there no longer really exists. There's no Wyco Elementary School, which made it Wyco Park, right? But I think that our community has stronger opinions on our park naming policy, and I just want them to be part of it. It's important to me moving forward that we make the community more involved, especially when it comes to naming parks and things like that, that we make sure. I forget who was in front of us last week. I think it was, I can't remember, but they were talking about, it might have been Brooke, the outreach, the community outreach and the extra steps that he did. And they got a really good response, you know, and I would imagine that's going to be a template in some way for outreach in the future. I think you did get quite a few on the last one that we looked at, but 71 people out of 33,000 really, you know, we have struggled with this as long as I've been on council. This is nothing, it's not a jab at staff nor anybody. We have struggled with how to get interaction from our residents and how to make sure that their voices are heard before they start screaming about their voices weren't heard, right? So I am fine with leaving as it's changed. I would just like to make sure that in the future, we make sure that these processes are handled, maybe tie up what happens in that 90 days. What is that 90 days really for, and what do we interpret that time to be used as? I mean, if it's a 90 days where someone has made a suggestion that they want to change a park, Wyco Park to Becky Brown Park, suggestion, Jay. You know, what is the anticipation after it goes to the Parks Board for that 90 days? Is that just, I'm lacking a really good word for it, but just a holder? So that after 90 days, if there's no negative and the Park Board agrees, now I have a park named after me? Or is that a period where we would do outreach and community involvement and things like that? I think that it's really important. Park names are very important to to a lot of people in our city. And like I said, I am not against the Odell Berry Park in any way, shape, or form. What I didn't like with that process is that it wasn't as transparent and clean as a lot of our processes are within the city of North. But I see no reason to make any changes to the policy, but with the exception of determining what that 90-day period is for. I would like to see that.
And just to clarify, the process that we followed for this one was the request was brought forward by the DICE Board at a regular Parks and Recreation Advisory Board meeting. And I don't have those dates off the top of my head.
You're okay.
But at a regular meeting, we put it on the agenda for the next 3 meetings to cover that 90 days as a discussion item and as an invitation for people to come in and provide input. We did provide information via the connection to say that that naming request had come forward and to talk a little bit about not Odell Berry Park. And now I've finally gotten used to calling it Odell Berry Park. At the time, we were referencing it as Justice Center West Park, just as a working title, so that we could let people know what was planned for that space. And then, as you mentioned, the news picked it up, which doesn't always happen on things like that. And
Yeah.
so they did pick it up and do a story there. The board made a recommendation. It did, and then based on timing and holidays and where council agendas, it did take a couple of months to bring that forward to council for action. And I think we brought that forward on 2 separate occasions.
Yeah, we did. We did. Most definitely. My comments are more that the synchronization of how everything was sent out, I just like to see that tied up. Granted, I'm sure that the Parks and Recreation Board has the exact same problem that we have at City Council. Nobody comes, yeah, I totally get that. And I have no answers after 8 years. City Council's the same way. So those were just my comments. I appreciate you bringing this forward and giving us a chance to talk about it.
Councilmember Kondo.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I was listening very intently to Councilmember Brown's comments, and so my sense is when I read the recommendation of the Parks and Recommendation Advisory Board on slide 11, it sounds like that's what you're talking about there. And so I would be wholeheartedly in favor of those minor modifications.
Would anyone else like to weigh in? Councilmember Long.
2 matters, clarification.
Was this,
When it comes to memorializing benches, how does that work? Is the family steps up and says, we would like to do this? I mean, is that how it works and they pay for it, or how does that?
Correct. So it's a partnership with the North Glen Community Foundation. Jenny Murphy in community engagement does that initial outreach when an individual would like to recognize someone with either a tree or a bench. Those payments are run through, the foundation purchases the bench, and they're paid for by the family or friends or an organization. The bench, the full costs of that bench or tree are covered by those donations. They provide the bench to the city, and the city does that installation.
So that's a separate matter entirely from what we're talking about?
It is.
Okay. When it comes to the monetary contribution that you mentioned something about 51% of the construction, but I don't know if somebody just makes a big donation to buy their way in, all due respect. I mean, what are the parameters there? You got something to share?
I would say that's not necessarily something staff would recommend, certainly something you could consider if you wanted to, just that other communities have done that. And I think they've done that to ensure, some said 51%. And I think that was to ensure that if someone was kind of buying their way in, that it was such a significant contribution that it probably made the difference between building the park or improving the park and not.
I see. So if somebody stepped up and said, I want $1 million to go to the new city hall,
Well, it wouldn't apply through this exact policy, but yes, you could put their name on it.
Making a jocular remarks.
Thank you. Well, looking at the options, it seems to me that staff is also wanting information for approval from council in terms of getting staff level approval for wayfinding processes. As Councilmember Walker mentioned, sounds like he would be in support as long as there's no naming of a person. Is that something that council
Yeah.
would give approval to staff for?
I agree.
Great. Amanda, is there anything else you need from us? Because I also see option for naming contest, which I personally, I don't know if a contest is the way to go, because that implies you have to pick a winner, and, maybe that's not the correct approach, but a call for action, definitely. And in terms of our outreach, I know this is something that Councilmember Burns and I had a discussion about, but hopefully this will come forward, but we are definitely missing out if we're not using our phones, SMS texting, or something of that nature. Just to throw that out there, because as Councilmember Brown said, that we've been trying really hard, staff does a great job of outreach, but times are changing, and our engagement is definitely reflecting that in terms of what folks are responding to. Councilmember Kondo.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. So that whole thing about a reverse kind of 911 SMS sort of thing, I'd like to ask Corey, can cities do that sort of thing? Can we send a text to say, yeah, what color do you like?
Yes.
Okay.
And I believe Diana Wilson has been looking at some options and will likely continue to bring communication options forward to you. I don't know what the timeline is on that specific one, but I know it's something that she has explored.
Gotcha. Thank you.
I would suggest that if that's something that council wants to wrap into consensus tonight, even though it's related but unrelated, I would say we can put it in the 2024 city budget process. I think Diana is planning on bringing something forward, but certainly direction from council doesn't hurt to have that.
Great, thumbs up if you would like to see that come forward.
I'm good.
So we have consensus. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I will work with the attorney's office to do those updates as we just talked about. And we'll bring that one's a resolution, so it's a little easier. So we'll bring that resolution forward to you for consideration at a upcoming meeting.
Thank you so much, Amanda.
Thank you.
Councilmember
Good to
Kondo,
see
do
you.
No.
Okay.
Of course.
Are there any other items for council tonight?
You did good on that time.
All right. Hearing none, we are adjourned. Have a great night, everyone.
Good job.